What if AGI isn't a technical milestone at all, though, but a dollar amount on a balance sheet?
The OpenAI to Microsoft definition of AGI was something like generating $100 billion in either earnings or revenue, I forget.
We're measuring compute in terms of gigawatts and AGI in terms of dollars. I love it. Amazon was all Anthropic for a while. Now they're OpenAI.
At some point, the circular economy becomes indistinguishable from the real economy, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
The circular economy becomes indistinguishable from the real economy. But if that's where the money's going, what's keeping anyone safe in this race?
I think there was no credible mechanism to guarantee safety in the first place. I think the entire premise was probably wrong. I think sort of the superficial gloss is, okay, we're in the Red Queen's race, and this is the race condition that everyone 10 years ago was scared of finding the world in, where we have a number of frontier labs all racing to do the terrible thing, that you build the thing and everyone dies. I don't buy that at all. I don't think this premise that either a heroic individual or a heroic frontier lab was ever going to be in a position to guarantee safety. And in fact, the sort of, I remember back to the earlier days of the frontier labs, where the concern and part of the reason why OpenAI was formed itself was concern of a singleton. Competition is how we guarantee that there isn't going to be a singleton that dominates the future light cone with superintelligence. And I think similarly, the notion that there's going to be sort of unilateral safetyism, where single heroic individual, like one of the more prominent AI doomers, or a very safety-oriented frontier lab is somehow going to ensure safety throughout the forward light cone, that was never going to happen. Safety, to the extent we get it, is going to come from competition. It's going to come, I think, from a balance of powers and a separation of powers. And I think what we want is competition between the frontier labs, and maybe even to some extent competition between nation states, such as what we're seeing, to compete to do the best job for advancing humanity. And I think any unilateral safetyism is probably a dead end.
Unilateral safetyism is a dead end, and safety will come from competition. But if no single lab can guarantee it, then what does it actually take?
Well, I would take the position that we are, that in some sense, again, the fundamental flaw, I think, in the thesis that safety would originate from a heroic individual or heroic organization is, I would argue, it takes an entire civilization to align a superintelligence. We took all of humanity's content online and used it in compressed form to pre-train AGI, baby AGI, in the early days, like summer of 2020 with GPT-3, why wouldn't it be reasonable to expect that it will take all of humanity to defensively co-align and co-scale superintelligence as well? It's not going to come from a single lab.
It takes all of humanity to align a superintelligence OE, not one lab. But didn't someone actually try to just pause everything?
Pausism was never going to work. I mean, we all know a number of folks at MIT and otherwise who advocated for a 6-month pause just for the entire space to cool off and wait for safety to catch up. Did safety catch up? Whatever that means, not at all. If anything, that functioned as an accelerant to capabilities. I also think even in the DNA of Anthropic was originally founded as an exodus of OpenAI employees who were purportedly concerned about safetyism or lack thereof at OpenAI. So they start a safety/AI alignment-oriented firm. Then they rapidly discover that the best way to do safety is to have your own models. And they discover the best way to have your own models is to raise a bunch of money to train your own models. And then they discover the best way to raise money to train your own models is to generate revenue. And the cycle completes where, yet again, an alignment-oriented firm becomes a capabilities firm. This happens over and over again. I would argue at this point, alignment and capabilities are inseparable. There's like a deep duality there.
Alignment and capabilities are inseparable. A deep duality, as he put it. So where does that leave Anthropic with the Pentagon right now?
They're in limbo. I mean, I write about this every day in my newsletter. Anthropic is, at the moment, my understanding is they're in limbo. They're probably in negotiation with the Department of War, but they're otherwise in limbo and cut off as a supplier and considered. I'm not sure whether I think Dario and others have made some formal statements that they haven't received anything in writing yet from the Department of War, but my understanding is that this administration is considering them a supply chain risk. And at the same time, notably, OpenAI struck a deal.
OpenAI struck a deal while Anthropic's frozen out as a supply chain risk. But what are these frontier models actually being used for on the geopolitical stage?
I was just going to say, maybe not even just a means to an end, but also, depending on which analysis of the Iranian situation you subscribe to, maybe an end to an end as well. If you look at Venezuela and the oil exports to China, and you look at Iran and the oil exports to China, the picture emerges, or at least one possible picture emerges, that what we're seeing is not just AI, where Claude is being used to perform the Venezuelan operation, perform the Iranian operation as a means to some sort of arbitrary or nebulous geopolitical purpose, but actually, arguably, with China looming in the background and possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan and the risk to the semiconductor supply chain and Western AI that would cause, it may be the case that AI is also the end to the means to the end, and that what we're seeing more broadly is, in some sense, superintelligence being used to protect the future of Western superintelligence.
Superintelligence being used to protect the future of Western superintelligence. But on the product side, what kind of AI agents are we actually getting?
Oh, for sure.
I'd take Anthropic at their face that this was, or OpenClaw, I guess, that the challenge was more trademark oriented than anything else. But I do think what have I been saying for weeks/days at this point that was distinctive about OpenClaw? It's the two things. It's headless, able to function autonomously for 24/7. And also that it's convenient to chat with via conventional messaging channels. And what do you see here with Cowork? Cowork is able to autonomously be scheduled headlessly. That's the headless part. And then remote control, that's the mobile messaging type part. But I think both of these are half measures. Like, I'm insufficiently motivated by each of these. I use Cowork from time to time, and I use Claude Code all the time. And neither of these, I think, is as compelling, at least conceptually, as a more OpenClaw-ish framework where all of these are cleanly packaged. And I think my guess is Anthropic and OpenAI and all of the other bigs will be forced to release their own sort of first-party OpenClaw competitor sometime in the next couple months.
Every big lab will be forced to ship their own OpenClaw competitor in the next couple months. But what about the products trying to play all the models against each other?
I looked at the demo. I think it's an interesting step in the direction of councils for everything. And I've had so many people over the past few months ask me for something like Perplexity's computer, where they're right now, if you have a given task, they'll manually go to the top 3 or 4 frontier models, ask them for independent opinions, and then try to synthesize that into one coherent whole. And that is essentially what Perplexity Computer tries to automate. There are others in the space as well. But I think even there, that it's nice sort of sugar, syntactic sugar, if you will, around the existing models. But I don't think it's transformative. I think ultimately, even this ability to counsel up or to create juries around lots of competing models, that's just going to be table stakes, as with so many other forms of scaffolding.
Did you just say syntactic sugar?
Multi-model councils will just be table stakes, like every other form of scaffolding. But can the infrastructure even handle always-on agents?
Of Jarvis.
Yes. Yeah. But remember, it's really expensive too. This is part of the reason, it's not the only reason, for running, say, Qwen locally under an OpenClaw scaffold. That's a lot of compute. If you have one or more agents that are running constantly for you, I'm not sure Anthropic in its present state even has the cloud infra to be able to launch a product like that. And I think in many cases, Anthropic, OpenAI, the others are probably just waiting around for their infra to catch up with applications like that before they launch it.
Yeah, agree.
The frontier labs are just waiting for their infra to catch up before they launch it. But what happens economically when the cost of generating content hits zero?
This is economics 101, or I should say microeconomics 101. When the cost of one good falls to near zero, the value of the complementary good increases. So as the value, or I should say as the cost of generation of content becomes post-scarce, which is exactly what we're seeing, that increases the value of its complement, which is verification, for now.
Yep, for sure.
Verification becomes the scarce good when generation is free. But here's the thing on the ASI pill that keeps blowing our minds, how simple these industry-killing tools actually are.
A couple of comments on this one. If you actually look at what these plugins are that Anthropic's launching that are causing the so-called SaaSpocalypse and reducing, carving $1.5 trillion off of market caps of various software companies, they are absurdly simple. They're just a bunch of MCP, model control protocol wrappers, and a bunch of skills with a set of bullets for how to go about carrying out different job industry roles or labor categories. This is not that complicated. I'm reminded, remember the scene in The Matrix, the villain is busy unplugging people without their cooperation from the Matrix, killing them in the process, and one of them says, "Not like this, not like this." That's basically what we're seeing, where these are just simple text files in many cases that are reducing single-handedly the market multiple, the trading multiple of entire industries. I think on the one hand, it's incredible that a simple text file can say chop 10% of the value off of a CRM firm, at least market value. On the other hand, these, as pointed out earlier, these plugins and the marketplaces of the plugins are so absurdly simple that I would reasonably expect these plugins are going to get just built in, since they're just scaffolding anyway, built into the next baseline version of the model and won't even need to exist independently in the future.
Alex, I think the interesting point here is a year ago, if you had delivered this as an entrepreneur, you'd be out in the market raising at multi-billion-dollar valuations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
It's called hyper-deflation for a reason, Peter.
It's called hyper-deflation for a reason. So what's left for knowledge workers when simple text files can nuke entire industries?
You're either the disruptor or you're disrupted.
Yeah, founder mode for everyone.
Right now,
you get founder mode, and you get founder mode.
Yes, I mean that's
right.
basically
That's
it.
right.
If the company and the board and the CEO are not in founder mode and willing to do dramatic surgery on the company, you're dead. You're walking dead in any industry.
I'd also be remiss, Peter, if I didn't point out, here we are basically on the eve of abundant knowledge work, of course, being cooked, knowledge work about to be post-scarce. And here we are wringing our hands over where to find scarcities in knowledge work as is about to become abundant. I just want to point out the irony.
We're wringing our hands over scarcity in knowledge work right as it becomes abundant. And the models themselves, they're getting smaller and better at the same time. So where does this end?
This is happening in Western models too. The difference is when, say, OpenAI launches a mini model or Google DeepMind launches a flash model, they don't advertise the parameter count, so it's not as viciously obvious as it is when a Chinese frontier lab launches an open weight model. We get to see the benefits of distillation in a successor model, but it's striking. We're seeing almost 10x reductions in parameter count while maintaining capabilities or even increasing capabilities. Yeah. And the broader picture, just to keep in mind, is the capability density of models is increasing. This goes hand in hand with what we've talked about in the past, Sam Altman's comment about 40x year over year hyper-deflation of costs at constant capability. In this case, my mind immediately goes to what's the end game here? If we can see an increase in capabilities with a reduction from 235 billion parameters to 35 billion parameters, what does the end game look like? Where does this end?
From 235 billion parameters down to 35 billion with the same capabilities. Where does the end game look like? AWO, how small can it actually get?
Get way smaller than a billion. I mean, I could imagine scenarios where it's only a few million parameter equivalents. That's sort of the core microkernel of AGI or superintelligence, and the rest lives in a flat text database or something.
A few million parameter equivalents, that's the core microkernel of superintelligence, with the rest living in a flat text database. So who's going to run this on your phone?
Seeing demos like this, in my mind, underline either, depending on whether you want to see it as competence or otherwise, how much of an opportunity Apple has to finally take the lead with local models, or conversely, how far behind they are in terms of taking the lead in terms of local models. But either way, clearly there's this enormous overhang. We could be running enormously competent reasoning models locally on all of our recent iPhones. The fact that it's not yet baked into the operating system, obviously, is very publicly embarrassing, maybe one wants to call it, for Apple. On the other hand, lots of rumors that this time around, finally with Gemini integration, they're on the critical path and they'll finally launch something.
Apple has the hardware but can't ship the software. Oh, borderline inexcusable, he said. But with powerful models shrinking to phone size, how do you even regulate what runs on everyone's device?
We know how to handle decentralized capabilities already. We have printers. In some cases, states are trying to regulate 3D printers. And before 3D printers, we had 2D printers that could be used for counterfeiting.
We've been regulating printers since before 3D printing. But should we actually be worried about 2 billion parameter models on someone's iPhone?
There are so many different ways that one can defensively co-scale against 2 billion parameter 6-bit models running on someone's iPhone. We've already talked about some of them. There are other ways. In the scheme of things, I don't think sort of these edge devices running tiny Chinese open weight models, either individually or collectively, pose an enormous hazard to the market. Like they're just not that capable relative to the other models that are out there.
Tiny Chinese open-weight models on edge devices don't pose an enormous hazard to the market. So what's the right defensive posture here?
Defensive co-scaling of making sure that the most flops are going to good purposes rather than bad purposes. I'm reminded, I think it was the New Yorker cartoon. Guy is up late at night at his computer saying, "Oh, I can't come to bed. Someone somewhere said something wrong on the internet." We can't we can't get so bothered by the fact that someone somewhere might be doing something wrong with a $2 billion parameter model.
We can't lose sleep over someone misusing a 2 billion parameter model. Meanwhile, Google just dropped something technically wild. What's buried under the headline?
We're just getting started here. And I think maybe buried underneath the headline, but in the release documentation, this is the first image model from Google that combines a reasoning model, which I think they used slightly flowery language for it, but basically the reasoning power of Nano Banana Pro with the instantaneity, I think they might have just said with the speed of Gemini Flash model. So under the covers, I think this is really interesting. It's combining probably some sort of diffusion model that we get with reasoning capabilities. And I think achieving the cost reductions of a diffusion model with nonetheless the capabilities of reasoning, we're going to see this spread from images, where it's mostly right now in video, back to text, back to code. There are a few other labs, smaller labs, that have started to make pretty loud announcements about how they're achieving purported 5x, 10x cost reductions or speed increases using diffusion models instead of autoregressive transformers. But I think this is probably the tip of the iceberg for some final consolidation of autoregressive transformers, which are used for code gen and natural language for the most part on the one hand, and then diffusion models and diffusion transformers on the other hand that are used for images and audio and video. We're just going to finally get one consolidated architecture at the end of the day that does everything.
One consolidated architecture that does everything. That's where this is heading. But what if you could skip all the diffusion iterations and go straight from noise to the final image?
You guys know?
OpenAI has been investing, this is in the published literature, investing a lot of effort, and probably DeepMind as well, maybe slightly less prominently, in trying to avoid the need for many iterations on a diffusion model. So a diffusion model normally, conventionally, takes many iterations to start from pure noise and refine the pure noise into the final image or the final video. There was a lot of interest that was publicly available, call it 6 to 12 months ago, from OpenAI and some other folks as well, to see if they could just one-shot or two-shot straight from pure noise to the final image. I do think, to your point, Dave, I think, although I haven't seen, maybe in the past 2 to 3 months, any scaling laws for diffusion models, prior to that, I saw a ton of work on scaling laws for diffusion models, and diffusion models have scaling laws too. Everything has scaling laws.
Everything has scaling laws, even diffusion models. Speaking of things that should have scaled faster, why is your phone still this dumb?
I think there's also a supply side element where the rising cost of memory is making phones in some cases more expensive. And we're seeing, I think, a generational transition from smartphones absorbing the silicon and absorbing TSMC's output over to AI data centers as the new form factor for computers away from this. But just narrowly on Gemini for multi-step tasking on Android, this is what Siri was originally supposed to be about. And before Siri, this is what the DARPA personal assistant that learns, or PAL, was supposed to deliver. We've known how to do this in some abstract sense for a decade plus. What was missing, why you ask, are we only getting this now? I always like to ask, why do things take so long? Why can't they be faster? In this case, I really think it was about a combination of reasoning models and vision language models that could fit compactly onto a personal device. And we're getting that now, finally, and it's going to be everywhere, but we really should have had this functionality, even without the ability to read the screen and understand arbitrary applications. We should have had this 10 years ago, and that's borderline inexcusable.
We should have had this 10 years ago, borderline inexcusable. Shifting gears here on the ASI pill. What even is AGI officially?
I suspect it's something similar. So the definition, my understanding based on public reporting of the OpenAI to Microsoft definition of AGI went through several iterations, with the most recent iteration prior to their, I think, for-profit transition being, and Salim, maybe you'll like this, it did actually have a definition. It was something like generating $100 billion in either earnings or revenue, I forget. So maybe we need to coin like AGI as a unit of currency, like an AGI is $100 billion of earnings or something.
AGI as a unit of currency, and AGI is $100 billion of earnings. And someone just wrote a $50 billion check to get back in the game.
There are lots of tendrils going both directions from Amazon to OpenAI and back based on public details of the announcement, like the requirement that OpenAI will use Amazon's Trainium or Trainium 2 chips for training. It's good for Amazon. It's good. Amazon has a long and storied history of purchasing their own customers in some sense, in some cases literally acquiring them, but in many cases paying for the information and the learnings that come from having a customer that's using Amazon as the world's most customer-centric company. And in this case, Amazon arguably missed the frontier AI boat. And so paying to deal themselves back into the game is, I think, par for the course. They're up to $50 billion of investment is at far worse terms than, say, Microsoft's original billions when Microsoft was much earlier in the game. And I think this is just the price of reestablishing themselves at the infra level of the party. And it's also been reported that as part of this deal, Amazon will get customized versions of OpenAI's models internally. Amazon will get to host as the exclusive third-party cloud host OpenAI's Frontier suite of automated AI coworker employees. So Amazon will get a lot out of this too.
I mean, this is so incestuous, what's going on right now. I mean, and Amazon was all Anthropic for a while. Now they're OpenAI.
You say incestuous, but go ahead, Dave, sorry.
Amazon gets customized OpenAI models, exclusive cloud hosting, and Trainium chips in the deal. But is this whole thing just the big players buying each other in circles?
I also think maybe, I would say incestuous, not perhaps the word I'd use for this, maybe circular is what we're gesturing at. Yeah. But even that, that's not my take at all. In this case, I see competition. And I also see horizontal stratification, that if Amazon is striking deals with Anthropic, but also with OpenAI, and OpenAI is moving some of its workload from Microsoft Cloud to Amazon and also to Google TPU clouds, that to me looks like the market for infrastructure for the frontier labs is very competitive. That's great for the economy. And B, it's starting to horizontally stratify. So if OpenAI is feeling impulses not just to vertically integrate down to the data center layer itself, but is so compute starved that it needs to, following the law of comparative advantage, needs to outsource some of its compute to Amazon with its Trainium architecture and Google with its TPUs, that's a sign, if anything, that there's such insatiable demand for compute that it's raining on everyone, even with perhaps less loved compute architectures.
There's such insatiable demand for compute that it's raining on everyone. So what does all that abundance mean for a single human trying to build a business?
That's why I think where this ends is, we get this question, I think, in the AMAs and otherwise all the time, like, what's left for humans? Should everyone become an entrepreneur? Well, let the chorus of YouTube commenters say, well, not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. I would say where this ends up, not in the distant future, like 10 years from now, but in the medium term, like 5 years from now, is single-person conglomerates, where a single person can oversee lots of agents that are all building businesses. This isn't for everyone, obviously, but as we start to get toward, one person or a zero person unicorn becoming more and more popular, again, I've argued in past, we're likely already there in some sense. But as we start to see that long tail of the number of people per company over some valuation start to stretch out, I think this model, call it a broader model of a one-person conglomerate where you have a person sitting on top of basically an entire PE firm's worth of agents, starts to make an enormous amount of sense. So I've been poking at Pulsia or Pulsia, and it's like a lot of micro businesses, and some of them look like they're varying levels of seriousness. But I checked, and you can actually, with some of its micro businesses, you can actually go and purchase stuff. So you can already engage in real commerce, spend real money via Stripe with some of the businesses that are running on its platform. And I think we're going to see so much more of this in the future.
You can already spend real money via Stripe at businesses running on AI platforms. But is this really new to you, or have we seen this movie before?
I would also argue we've seen this happen before in finance with quantitative trading algos, which went from none of the volume in public securities markets to 70, 80, 90+% of the daily volume. And you know what? People survive. We still have human traders manually fat-fingering trades into the public securities markets, but by volume, they're completely dominated by algorithmic traders. I think we're going to see the same thing happening in the rest of the world outside finance, in the physical world, in various e-commerce spaces, where over time, most of the volume will eventually be dominated by algorithms.
Most of the volume will eventually be dominated by algorithms, just like quant trading took over finance. And it's not just digital anymore. It's starting with fast food.
Meat puppets.
Meat puppets. You have to, two things. One, admire the punny name Patty for a burger chain. So clever. Two, going back to my comments from a few pods ago that we're going to be living in every single sci-fi scenario at once. This was a sci-fi scenario, I would argue, called Mana. Mana was a novel written by Marshall Brain about 20 plus years ago at this point, where you had human employees who were on headsets all taking directions from a centralized AI in businesses. We're there. We've arrived in Mana, and it starts with fast food.
We've arrived in Mana, and it starts with fast food. But what do you call it when the AI is watching the meat puppets work too?
Exactly.
It's Orwellian. One has to admire the Orwellian nature of the naming.
We do.
And I'm waiting for it to say, so you dropped the fries for the third time this morning? Let's see how it deals with that.
This is literally, Peter, it's literally meat puppets.
It's literally meat puppets. But how long until even the meat puppets get replaced?
I also think this is the transition can happen really quickly relative to political swings. This is, you don't need that much training data to automate away many of these tasks with humanoid robots and VLAs so close to being production ready for certain applications. I don't think the transition period with Paddies, or again, call out to Mana by Marshall Brain, which foresaw all of this 20 plus years ago. I don't think the transition period is going to be long enough to even necessarily give political counter swings enough traction to make it worth it.
1 year, 2 years?
Well, it's already happening. The transition's already happening.
Course,
but to VLA robots, I think, next 2 to 3 years.
VLA robots are 2 to 3 years from production ready. And the energy to power all of this, it's arriving faster than anyone expected.
And
it's interesting,
also
right?
in an environment with diminished subsidies also. All of the hand-wringing from months ago, the subsidies are going away, how awful it is. No, we're getting solar even in the absence of the same subsidies we had.
You don't need
Solar is booming even without the subsidies everyone was wringing their hands about. But what if data centers don't just consume energy? What if they start giving it away?
I also think this points in the direction of enterprise use cases of superintelligence driving the cost, at least the marginal cost of energy down towards zero for consumers. In the same sense that all these enterprise use cases of frontier models are effectively driving the cost of superintelligence for intelligence's sake, for reasoning's sake, for consumers down to zero. You don't pay, many people don't pay for ChatGPT or Gemini. It's ad-supported at most, otherwise free. I think this points in the direction of eventually, so like right now, it's the frontier labs have to pay for their own electricity bill. Tomorrow, 2-3 years from now, I think we move to a world where AI has driven such an overabundance of energy that the next deal might be offering free electricity to communities within a certain radius of the data centers. And this is how we get to abundance.
Free electricity for communities near data centers. That's how we get to abundance. And the companies building those data centers, they're all investing in each other now.
And Meta, it's probably worth adding, Meta has, and this is public information, made various attempts to develop its own in-house training and inference time chips. And to the extent those perhaps aren't arriving on time or aren't arriving at the desired capability level, certainly a partnership with AMD that functions as a quasi-vertical integration is, I think, quite a strategic move. I also tend to think, for the chorus of folks who are worried about the circular economy, if it is a circular economy, the circle ultimately is getting so broad of companies investing in each other and buying multi-deca or multi-centillion-billion-dollar sets of chips, of energy, et cetera, from each other. At some point, the circular economy becomes indistinguishable from the real economy, and I think that's what we're seeing here. Singularities make for strange bedfellows.
Mm-hmm. Singularities make for strange bedfellows. So strange that Meta might become a cloud provider.
Zuck has also indicated that Meta is open to starting its own cloud. So if it can't find enough revenue from ads or otherwise to drive this, it could always, say, serve as a host for OpenAI or some other frontier lab.
Full verticalization, right? Elon
everyone needs everyone.
Yeah. Everyone needs everyone. Switching from silicon to carbon, now on the ASI pill, what if you could literally search and replace on human DNA?
Yeah, it's probably also just worth doing 30 seconds of education on what the underlying treatment is. So this is a technique called prime editing. It was, at least it's attributed to David Liu, who runs a chemistry research group at Harvard. No, David, he's doing amazing work. But many people may be familiar with CRISPR. CRISPR, of course, widely hailed as being a tremendous advance in terms of enabling DNA editing. There are variants of CRISPR for RNA editing, for various sorts of biological sequence editing at this point. But what's interesting, historically, if you wanted to edit the genome, you'd induce what's called a double sequence break. You basically break both pairs of DNA, both halves. And this can induce errors. It's messy, it's sloppy. And so there's been a driving desire to be able to edit DNA in place without breaking both halves of it. And so we saw in recent years so-called base editing that was able to edit just a single nucleotide without a break. And then a few years ago, we saw from David's group, again, he's done amazing work historically on directed evolution and other things. He's pivoted post-CRISPR invention/discovery to CRISPR derivatives. So he invented this prime editing technique that's able to literally do a search replace without a double-stranded break on DNA up to a number of nucleotides in DNA. And so this particular disease is, I think, just one of many diseases that in principle will lend themselves, not just like single nucleotide polymorphism diseases that are based on a single base pair in your genome being wrong or not what it otherwise would be, but multiple nucleotides in sequence that need to be edited. We now have the ability to basically do a find, search, replace on DNA without breaking the entire double strand. And that's going to be a very, very general platform. I make the point in my newsletter almost every day, biology is becoming a read-write resource, and DNA in particular, we're there.
Biology is becoming a read-write resource, we're there, and the market is starting to price that in. Could the first biotech trillion-dollar company be right around the corner?
I'll just, maybe ask you, Peter, a question. How long until we talk of the Magnificent Seven, but Eli Lilly is, of course, the American counterpart to Novo Nordisk, and at this point, a good deal more successful. How soon do you think it is before, without this being construed or construable as investment advice, before Eli Lilly joins the Mag 7 as the first biotech member, given that arguably, maybe you'll disagree with this, GLP-1s are sort of the first pan-spectrum quasi-anti-aging drugs that we've ever seen.
GLP-1s might be the first pan-spectrum anti-aging drugs we've ever seen. Just how close is Eli Lilly to cracking the $1 trillion ceiling?
For sure. Their market cap, just for what it's worth as we're recording, they're knocking on $1 trillion market cap. Eli Lilly's market cap is about $950 billion. So perilously close.
Eli Lilly's market cap is perilously close to $1 trillion. Now back to physical AI. We, the ASI pilled, keep debating. Will all robots end up looking human?
There's demographic forcing function. They need it for economic growth. And I just think in general, going back to the robot form factor and shape question that I know Salim loves to talk about, it's not 100% clear to me whether these different robot form factors end up being the moral equivalent of dedicated computers prior to the personal computer. If you remember, like electronic word processors prior to the development of PC, maybe the ill-fated Wang computer, for example, in the Boston area, do these dedicated form factors that aren't necessarily general purpose. Like if you're not watching the videos, one of these robots is sort of a quadruped that has wheels that may or may not generalize to the same sorts of terrain that, say, a bipedal humanoid capable of doing crazy acrobatics is capable of doing. Do we end up in a world where essentially, Salim, forgive me for this, where the predominantly most of the robot shapes are, strictly speaking, humanoids with 2 arms, 2 legs, because that's where the meat of the market is in a human predominantly world.
Humanoids with 2 arms and 2 legs, because that's where the meat of the market is in a human-dominated world. But some investors on the ASI pill wavelength are thinking way bigger than robots.
Yeah,
finally are. And the 140 characters, which is expanded.
And the 140 characters, yes. The 140 characters are buying a Dyson swarm right now. They're skipping straight over flying cars.
There you go.
They're skipping straight over flying cars and buying Dyson swarms. But do we actually build one? Or does new physics make it completely pointless?
Yeah. I see one of these questions mentions Dyson swarms, so I guess I have to answer that one. So the question is, do concepts like Dyson swarms rely on energy being unsolvable? Why is power a bottleneck with math and physics significant advancements? By Sparker 602. So I want to answer a question that Sparker 602 isn't asking, but arguably should be asking, which is, do concepts like Dyson swarms rely on physics being what we currently think it is? And I think this adjacent question, which Sparker may or may not be asking, is the existential question that in my mind will likely decide whether we actually do build a solar system scale Dyson swarm or not. I think for an Earth scale or Earth-centered Dyson swarm in solar synchronous orbit, SSO, that looks like a Saturn ring, I think we're probably going to build that regardless. But for a solar system scale Dyson swarm where we're disassembling Jupiter and the other planets, Mercury, your time is coming. For that,
Mercury's fine. We can lose Mercury.
We can afford to lose Mercury. It never had much going for it anyway. For a solar system scale Dyson swarm, I think whether we build that or not will hinge on whether the physics of our universe looks substantially different from the physics that we currently recognize. For example, if it turns out that it is possible to travel between star systems with faster than light travel, even though the physics of the moment that we have suggests otherwise, there are enough edges that it's conceivable that maybe some new physics comes along in the next few years and we discover it's much easier to travel between the stars faster than light effectively. If that comes along, I imagine a scenario where Dyson swarms turn out to be complete dead end and we don't even bother building a Dyson swarm. If, on the other hand, we're stuck with the speed of light as we currently understand it, and we're more or less stuck with the low energy physics that we currently think we live in, then Dyson swarm seems like a very natural civilizational outcome where, because we can't travel between the stars easily other than sending star wisps at, maybe laser-powered star wisps traveling at a substantial relativistic fraction of the speed of light, then, of course, for latency reasons, we're going to huddle around our sun and we're going to disassemble the planets and we're going to do this horizontal exponentiation. We're going to take apart Mercury and Jupiter, maybe Saturn. We'll see about Saturn. And so in short, the bottleneck isn't power, it's latency. And if latency turns out to be a bottleneck because we can't travel faster than the speed of light, we build the Dyson swarm. If latency doesn't turn out to be the bottleneck because we can travel faster than light, we don't build the Dyson swarm. That's my answer.
If we can't travel faster than light, we huddle around our sun and disassemble the planets. If we can, we don't build the Dyson swarm at all. Back to Earth now. Someone asks, why isn't anyone talking about Apple's M4 chips?
Okay, I'll take the softball question. Question number 7, why aren't Apple chips like M4 being discussed on the AI landscape? This is from JBC0 or CO1BR. The answer is they are. The premise of the question is completely wrong. M4 and now M5 are at the heart of the infra boom for edge computing via OpenClaw agents and otherwise. M4 has Apple's amazing unified memory architecture. You're able to host very large AI models at the edge locally without being dependent on an AI-based frontier vendor, and they have accelerated neural engines that enable fast tensor multiplications. They are very much being discussed on the AI landscape. What isn't being discussed on the AI landscape, I would argue, is Apple's software layer. Apple has been nowheresville in terms of leveraging their own amazing compute. They've released a number of frameworks that are very helpful for third parties to develop and host models on top of chips like the M4. But Apple, almost infamously, has done an atrocious job of developing its own software level capabilities on top of M4 and similar. So to the extent that that's the question, why hasn't Apple leveraged its own capabilities? There's a long and sordid history there of where Apple went wrong. There have been suggestions that Apple sort of misfired with the way it organized Siri, or concerns about privacy, or Apple being unwilling or unable to invest in the data center infra to train its own in-house models to be able to be locally hosted, to overpromising, to expectations concerning edge-level integration not being there. I think it's a cluster of reasons. Hopefully, Apple, to the extent that I'm an Apple user, hopefully Apple is able to finally, this time for real, get their act together at WWDC in June. One can hope.
Apple can hope to get their act together at WWDC in June. One can hope. And while we're on things that should have died by now, why do CAPTCHAs still exist?
Could do.
That's and they required using REST APIs to post instead of humans. But you know what happens, of course, humans use their bots or just relatively simple programs to post instead.
Yeah, bot puppets.
So, yeah, bot puppets, exactly. So it goes both ways. I for the life of me, I don't understand why CAPTCHAs are still in use, but credit to Louis von Ahn for inventing them nonetheless.